Former Bank of England Governor Lord Mervyn King has said the COVID-19 furlough support scheme may need to continue throughout next year, throughout 2021, as more local areas in England and also in Wales enter stricter lockdown measures. What sort of support does the government need to provide to save jobs, businesses and the economy as we enter this nasty winter period? Coming up in this video. Hi everyone, I'm Martin Bamford from Informed Choice. I'm a chartered financial planner, and in this video I'd like to look at some comments made by former Bank of England Governor Lord Mervyn King. Mervyn King, of course, was the Bank of England Governor during the global financial crisis, so he steered the UK economy through that, some would argue relatively successfully. He certainly knows his onions when it comes to an economic crisis, and that's why I think his comments today about the need for the government to extend its furlough scheme support, I think are so relevant, so important. Now I'm going to be looking at an article in The Guardian written by Richard Partington, who's their economics correspondent, just pulling out a few comments made by Mervyn King and talking about why these are so important as we enter this quite difficult winter period and as we see more local lockdown measures taking place. Now, Mervyn King starts by explaining that now is not the time to worry about rising levels of national debt. Of course, in the past few days, we've seen that the British net public debt has exceeded 100% of GDP. It's now the highest level in peacetime for the UK, so it's reached this very significant threshold. And there have been noises from Rishi Sunak, Chancellor of the Exchequer, suggesting that we need to ease off a little bit when it comes to accumulating debt. He talked at the Conservative Party conference about his responsibility to balance the books. And I have to say I agree with Mervyn King on this one. Now is not the time to take their foot off the gas. We are still in the middle of this pandemic when businesses and local economies are facing quite stringent lockdown measures. It is entirely inappropriate to talk about removing government financial support because you can't have one without the other. If the government are limiting trade and restricting business activity on one hand, it would be inappropriate for them to withdraw financial support previously supplied on the other hand. You can either let businesses trade freely, in which case there is of course a big risk the virus will run rampant through society, or you can impose these local lockdown measures, these circuit breakers and fire breaks, whatever else you want to brand them as, and at the same time provide support to ensure that businesses can at least get through the other side of those local measures. Once that's happened, then it becomes free market forces. So once businesses are free to trade and the economy is open for business, businesses that can survive will survive without government support. But right now, while you're imposing restrictions, the government must continue to provide its emergency backing. And on that point, Lord King has said the more stringent the measures, the more generous the support needs to be. Quite right. If you go from a situation where the economy and local society is fairly open, as it has been for the past few months, really since about June when lockdown measures were lifted, to this sort of tier 2, tier 3 level of local lockdown, or even more stringent in Wales with a circuit break or a fire break as they're calling it, then you need to be more generous the more severe those restrictions are. These things come in balancing factors, so the more stringent you are, the more generous you need to be on this side, and hopefully the government will hear that message from Lord King. Now, speaking at the same time, Alistair Darling, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, made some analogies about war, saying it's a bit like war. You can't say halfway through it, well, I'm sorry, we can't afford another battleship or any more tanks. You're in this and you've got to see it through. So once this process has started, it's no good for Chancellor Rishi Sunak to suddenly withdraw financial support and say, well, we gave it a bit of a shot and now we got to a level we can't support it anymore. He's clearly worried. He talked at the Conservative Party conference about his sacred responsibility to rein in these record levels of government debt, and have no doubt, as I've spoken about in a previous video, we will all be paying this debt back in years to come, but not just yet, and probably not next year either, maybe not the year after that. The higher taxes are coming at some point. We do need to pay back this government public debt, But for now, the most important thing is keeping businesses afloat, keeping people in jobs, because we're seeing record levels of unemployment. And we're expecting to see far higher levels of unemployment still when the coronavirus jobs retention scheme comes to an end at the end of October, the furlough scheme, and it's replaced with this new job support scheme, which is far less generous. So more unemployment to come. For now, regardless of the massive amounts of public debt the government is racking up, they really do need to keep jobs protected, keep businesses going until it's a fair and level playing field for everyone. And then we can see which businesses are viable, which businesses can survive into the future, and which ones without government support, but when the open economy is there, are simply unviable and will fail. Lord King also drew some comparisons to over a decade ago during the global financial crisis, which was, as I said, when he was governor of the Bank of England, and he said it's a very different world today, and of course it is. And one of the big different factors today compared to then is how low interest rates are. Low interest rates, of course, mean the government can borrow money more cheaply, and that's really one of the big restraints taken away from government borrowing right now. Even though government borrowing, net public borrowing, is around 100% of GDP, its highest ever peacetime level, the government really isn't as hamstrung when it comes to borrowing money. They have got this potential to borrow a lot more because interest rates and the cost of borrowing are just so low. So while they can borrow cheaply, it makes sense to keep on borrowing and accumulate that public debt, but spend it and keep businesses going, keep the economy afloat. However, Lord King also warned the Bank of England's current governor, Andrew Bailey, not to rush into negative interest rates, saying they would do little to protect the UK economy during a second wave of COVID-19. And again, have to agree with that one. I personally don't believe we're going to see negative interest rates in 2021, as many are saying we might do. I had an interesting conversation with an Informed Choice colleague this afternoon, and one of the issues here is simply logistical. Banks don't really have the IT systems in place to administer negative interest rates. At the time they were putting these systems in place, negative interest rates were not something that was being considered, not something anyone thought they were going to see in their lifetime, and as a result, these IT systems were not coded in such a way that they could administer negative interest rates. So from a practical perspective, negative interest rates will mean you'll have to pay to keep cash in savings. And if you have a mortgage and it's on a bank rate tracker, then you'll be paid for having a mortgage. So from an administration perspective, can you imagine all of the banks trying to charge savers and repay mortgage borrowers? It would be a complete logistical nightmare. The banks simply don't, in my opinion, have the capacity or the systems to administer that. And that's one very good reason why it won't happen. But probably the most important reason why negative interest rates won't happen is because they would probably have minimal impact on the economy. There are other far more effective things that the government can do now to stimulate the economy, to encourage consumer spending. Helicopter money is the next logical step, and you could argue we've already seen helicopter money this year through the furlough scheme, through the grants to small businesses, through the other packages of government financial support. But an explicit helicopter money scheme, putting money directly into the pockets of consumers, maybe with a prepaid debit card, which they could only spend with retailers, physical retailers, not online ones, that would get the economy going. That would get the high street kicked into a higher gear. And that could well be the way out of this economic mess caused by COVID. Negative interest rates, in my opinion, are not the solution here, but some sort of helicopter money scheme could well be. So I think these comments from Lord Mervyn King, really, really interesting perspective from a man who has been there, done that. He didn't have to deal with a pandemic and the impacts of that on an economy, but he did have to deal with a fairly nasty global economic crisis, and the impact that had on UK GDP at the time was severe, it was significant. So I think some really important comments here. What do you think of what he had to say? How long do you think the government will have to keep its furlough schemes going, and how long do you think they'll have to keep providing emergency financial support to businesses, to the economy? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, thank you for watching. Please do leave a like for this video. Please do hit the subscribe button as well so you get future videos like this one too. We are growing this channel rather rapidly at the moment, which is great to see. I've made a commitment to make videos on a more regular basis, to react to topical things like this, and hopefully bring some education, some inspiration when it comes to your personal finances. But I'm Martin Bamford. When it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow. Thank you for watching.